So I'm going to try to do something ambitious. I've prepared more than I may be able to cover, but I hate to run short. Not that the conversation couldn't fill in the space. I think you do a very good job with that, but I'm going to do this in three parts if we get to all three. And the first, I'm going to talk about contemplation. Then I'm going to teach you a method of contemplative prayer. And if we have time, we'll get to Lectio Divina. And that is a form of praying the scripture. And if we don't get to it, I'll just have to do it some other time. But it's a very powerful way of getting outside of feeling like we have to be academics to understand scripture, and just being in the moment with what the Spirit speaks to us through the word. So there's three parts, and after each part, I'll give a chance for us to check in with each other, but I'm going to ask that we not ask questions until this. So I get the first part done, and then hold your questions, and we'll give a chance to do that. And I want to start with contemplation. Contemplation, when we hear about it, we think about what comes to mind for you. We'll ask you that before we get going. What can I say for contemplation?
Praying.
Pray.
Consideration.
Consideration.
Meditation.
Meditation.
Quietness.
Quietness.
Reflectiveness.
Reflecting. Okay, that's very good. Contemplation is we often think about it as only a time of prayer. But the real goal of contemplation is to have a contemplative life. In other words, it is, as someone described it, it is an awareness and attention to all of life through which we discover the embrace of God's love. So it is learning to be in the moment, no matter where we are. I mean, Paul says in the New Testament, I think it's Paul that says, pray always. Well, how do you pray always? By being mindful and in the moment. So it's not just about the prayer time. It is a way of being, a way of life that we can learn to train ourselves to be able to be a part of and do that. Welcome.
Thank you.
There's a seat here and there's one over there too. So I would like to talk a little bit about this and about how it is a way of life first. And some of you have heard this before maybe, but one of my favorite speakers or writers is Frederick Buechner. He was nominated a long time ago for all kinds of book awards, but he's 90-something years old, still going. And Frederick Buechner has 3 autobiographical books, very short, not sequential. You could read either one and more topical. His last one was called Telling Secrets, and it's one of my favorite all-time autobiographical books. It's powerful. It taught me how to reflect on my own life, and I recommend it.
What's it called again?
Telling Secrets.
Selling?
Telling. And it's basically about his father's suicide when he was very young. And he reflects on how his life has gone, how he's worked that through, but it's much bigger than that. You'll sense that by this story. I just want to read this to you because I think it's powerful about being contemplative in the moment. He wasn't even trying to be, and it happened to him. I remember sitting parked by the roadside, terribly depressed and afraid about my daughter's illness, what was going on in our family. When out of nowhere, a car came along down the highway with a license plate that bore on it the one word out of all the words in the dictionary that I needed most to hear exactly about it. The word was trust, Trust. What do you call a moment like that? Sometimes to laugh off as a kind of joke that life plays on everyone once in a while. The word of God spoken to us. I'm willing to believe that maybe it was some of both, but for me, it was an epiphany. The owner of the car turned out to be, as I suspected, a trust officer in a bank. And not long ago, having read an account I wrote of the incident somewhere, he found out where I lived. And one afternoon brought me the license plate to go. Which sits propped up on a bookshelf in my house to this very day. It is rusty around the edges, a little battered, and it is also as fully a relic as I have ever seen. That's the moment when God spoke. And there are moments like that. Now, this was a big moment. He was in a lot of pain. His daughter really was in the hospital. He goes into his book in the hospital, and the more he tried to talk her to eat, they finally had him. He had an offer to go across the country for a few months. Said, "You need to go because you're not helping your daughter." But he was terrified of losing her, and she came through that, grew up an adult. But that just lets you know that moment. But you know, it's not always that dramatic. We can hear. By being in the moment, we can see things we miss all the time. I go walking all the time with Marla. Almost every day we walk on the prairie path. We live 2.5, 3 blocks on the prairie path. And we go down there and walk. And you know, I'm thinking about what's coming up, I gotta get due, or something has happened, wanting to. She says, "Can we just be in the moment? Can we just pay attention?" And we'll slow down, and she notices everything. Did you hear that bird? Let's see if we can see it. Or you know, or look how was, you know, she's always identifying birds, but just the beauty of in the fall of the leaves this year have been just amazing. I remember one time I was walking the prairie path by myself, and I guess I was being more in the moment. And as I was walking, I was about to step on this beautiful red and black caterpillar that was trudging across the pebble pathway. And I didn't step on it. When I looked down, and I was just filled with awe. Such a beautiful creature that I might have stepped on or missed or never seen. And it made me realize, if God makes that so unique, how is there such an abundance everywhere? I felt some deep spiritual connection for just a moment. Before I come to church, sometimes I almost always know I'm taking a walk. No matter, this was before daylight saving time, just a few weeks ago. So it was really dark. As I get up early, I try to get here by 6 o'clock in the morning, or 6:15 or something like that. But anyway, there was this heavy fog, and thick fog. And it was beautiful, just beautiful. And it was not so thick above that I couldn't see above, and I could see a clear sky. And right above me was a half moon, competing for my attention from Jupiter, which was, I thought, Venus at the time. It was actually Venus and Uranus together. I found out later, I thought it was Venus, but it was in the eastern sky. And it just, what a way to begin your day. There are times we have conversations with people, and we think that, you know, our mind's busy, so we see someone, we're thinking about things, we've got our agendas in our head, and we see someone, we want to say hello, we want to acknowledge them, and maybe they share something with us, and we completely miss it because we're thinking of the next thing that we're going to say. Or we're thinking of an anecdote from our own life. This is my issue, an anecdote of my own life, rather than just staying with what they are saying. But to be contemplative is to be in the moment with that person and to really listen and hear and connect. So contemplation is this amazing gift that God gives us. You know, it is so much of life is a means of grace. You know, the Quakers don't practice, many Quakers don't practice communion. You know why? Dan does, I bet. Maybe you've heard it. They don't practice communion because all of life is a means of grace. They do not want to narrate down. All of life is a means of grace. All of life is a sacrament. And to live your life open for that grace is, I think, one of the most important things we do in our life, because it centers us and helps us to connect with the goodness of the creation. And that means necessarily sometimes getting out of the drama in our minds. Letting go the train of thoughts that just sometimes preoccupy us, or the anxiety or even the excitement about something. Sometimes finding a place to let that go. We call it this practice I'm talking about, Christianity, it's called the practice of the presence of Christ. And there's a lot of good books on that. But how do we become that? How do we learn to embrace being in the present moment? How do we begin to see this world as a sacrament, a doorway to the sacred, of divinity itself? The practice of meditative prayer opens our heart to commune with the indwelling of the Spirit of God, that over time fosters what Thomas Merton called life itself, fully awake, fully aware that it is alive, a spontaneous awe at the sacredness of life of being. In other words, we don't just learn that. It's not something we practice it throughout the day, but we learn it really by having private times, quiet times of contemplation that teach us to learn to feel we have some control over our mind, that teach us to be more in the moment. And it's what paying attention to our life is about. Now, I'm one of the worst people to teach this. I'm a little bit intimidated. I feel a bit of a hypocrite because my prayer life has been at times pretty inconsistent. I'm pretty good at praying for people. I do it all throughout the day. One of you comes up and you had something going on. I say, Lord, have mercy. I think about you, Lord, have mercy. Or when I have my prayer time, I say, Lord, have mercy. And it's a very powerful time. But I'm the kind of guy I'm the kind of guy who's going to drift off sometime. I'm an extrovert for one thing. I am someone who's always thinking thoughts about high verbal aspects, kind of my deal. So I'm always using that skill and gift. And some of you who work with me probably know I'm a little bit ADHD. So I underestimated that, not me. But I'm actually pretty good about sitting still. I'm not good with my thoughts sometimes. That's where I get lost. I have to really focus and remind myself. So prayer, quiet time comes as a difficult thing for me sometimes. And some of you probably have the same experience. And keeping that time. By the way, one thing I learned to say from a conference I went to when I was first starting ministry, it was on time management. And the guy at Lake Junaluska, this wonderful guy, he said, never say I don't have time, because if you say that, you're lying. You have time. But I know I really don't have time. You don't realize my weeks, you have time. What you need to say is, right now, that's not a priority for me. Because it's all about priorities. And if you want to be polite, you can say, you know, I have a lot of things planned that I need to get done, and we find a different time. That discipline alone helps you feel some degree of control in your life. And it's a gift to remember that, especially when you're trying to set up some kind of prayer time. It may be 5 minutes, it may be hopefully maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15. So I thought I'd share with you about how kind of this has gone for me. I've got to the place where I find it easier to keep my time than I used to. And what's happened is I found the power of contemplation. I've been doing contemplative prayer for a long time. But the older I get, the more important it becomes to me. And I think that's true for any of us as we get older. Because, you know, life will not be always full when you retire. And there's a lot to think about. And learning to contemplate and be with God is a way of restoring us to our fullest self. Sometimes I keep now contemplation twice a day. Sometimes I may contemplate for 40 minutes. And I find it always, if I'm having a hard day, when I've been sick, it was especially helpful to restore me, to come back to myself. And I started doing this. Before I did this, when I was first trying to learn to pray, I thought prayer is a conversation with God as a friend. That's what I was taught as a youth. And I did that a lot, but the more I heard myself talking to God, it just feels like that drama that runs through my head all the time, that sounds a bit gibberish and shallow. And I don't have a problem. Some of you may find that powerful, and it may be for you. I'm not saying it's wrong. But I didn't feel it satisfying. Not that every time I pray, I've got to have this spiritual experience. It doesn't happen like that. But I realized that I needed to be able to learn a different way of praying. So pretty much what I do now is I pray and pray for people I'm concerned about. And after I've done that, sometimes I will find coming up within myself my own prayer that's more from the heart than from the drama that I can, this doesn't sound, it sounds more like gibberish. And it's something I really need to pray. And then I go into contemplation. And we're going to practice that in just a bit. But first I want to talk about an inward self and an outward self. The outward self is that life that we spend 99.5% of our time creating. It is the part that begins with us connecting and being loved and connecting to our parents. It expands to friends and friendships, to school and to learning, to one day sensing a sense of purpose and a call that we do. It extends to the work that we do in our life, to establishing some kind of financial stability to who we are and what our lives are. It's a very core part of being human, because this world is good and God intends us to be co-creators with God in our world, and to be in relationship and loving relationship with each other. It is what we spend most of our waking hours thinking about. And it is a gift. Now, sometimes when I read meditation material, it seems very secondary. I don't know why, but it just doesn't seem quite as important as I think it is. It seems like, no, meditation is everything. I think meditation, the outward self and the inward self, are very much connected. The inward self, there's a lot of names for that inward self that we call it by. Sometimes we call it the essential self. Sometimes the spiritual self. Sometimes we may call it our soul, or we'll call it our sacred self, or simply our heart. Frederick Buechner used the term that I read this week that I really like, because I think it defines it quite well, and it's our deeper self. Our deeper self. The body self, the outward self, and this deeper self, this spiritual, sacred self, our heart, are always in Christianity connected. I don't know enough about Buddhism, about what it's like, but there is a Gnostic understanding that took over Christianity at some point, where we had this belief that we are a body, a shell that contains the soul. And that soul is, in some Greek thought, trapped, being held down, and not some Gnostic thought. There was Gnostic Christians who practiced it, but that was never Jesus's view of how we're made. It was not Paul's understanding of how we were, because they were Jews. Jews believed body, mind, spirit are deeply you can't disconnect them. They believe that the body is resurrected. Now, I know that sounds weird. How can a body be resurrected? How was Jesus resurrected? Jeffrey did a wonderful sermon, I think, last Easter on this that stayed with me, and that I really liked. It was talking about that side of ourselves that is, the body of Jesus was a physical body. was resurrected. I mean, if you read all the texts of the resurrection appearances of Jesus, people touched Jesus, people ate, he ate, but also he walks through doors. So we have a very discombobulated thing now, and Paul's speaking, I think it was in Thessalonians, he talks to a community of this, and time was passing, and they were saying, but what, some of our people are dying, they're decaying, these are Greeks, conversing Christians, so well, what's gonna happen? He says, God will give a new body likened to the old, but fit for heaven or fit for presence from God. It's a mystery. But I know in Christianity and Hebrew and Jewish thought, it's very important to keep this connection with the body and spirit. So the outward life is fed by the inward life. And the inward life, and the other way around. They're deeply connected. Both are essential to who we are. So the practice of contemplation is going deep into this self that so many people will never give focus to. They'll never acknowledge it. Our culture does everything, not intentionally, but unaware to bring us apart from that. I am doing my best now, after listening to a program on TED Talks, series of programs, to disconnect from my cell phone. I mean, I need it, I value it, I have it with me even when I walk, I don't want to camp on steps, but you know, you open it up and you want that little rush, you play a little silly game, solitaire or something, and then you think, oh, wasted time. Or you get on the internet and you've wasted so much time. Do we know how to be quiet? And just be? Are we always just human doings? Or are we human beings? What's it like? You get anxious just sitting still in your house rather than picking up the phone and just enjoying, maybe looking around for things you've never noticed, or maybe just thinking other thoughts. I think as this electronic thing takes over for us, it's the people who are going to fare best are those who learn to discover the beauty of silence. And so I want us to, I wanted to talk a little bit about how I found this deeper self for me. It started pretty early, know that it was there. When I was in junior high school, my grandmother moved 2 houses down from us. She moved from the little Delta town of Lula to be near us as she got older. And I would go over to her house, and she had on her carport, at the end of her carport, an old wicker swing. It had far too many coats of paint on it. It was quite old, but sturdy. And we would sit on that swing together, and she would bring out this notebook of thick poems that she had written, and she would share her poems with me. I can't believe I did this as a junior high kid, but I did. And I'd listen to those poems, and one time I was there with her, and I remember she must have sensed, you know how you kind of get beat up in middle school? Literally? Yeah. And you beat up in middle school, and she could sense what was happening. She said to me, Alan, there's part of you that nothing in this world can take from you. And she pointed to her heart. It's right here. It's a part of you that is connected to God. Always connected to God. It's a place where you don't have to perform and be judged. It is a place of unconditional love and forgiveness. It is a place of where you can be fully yourself and connected not only to God, but because you are connected to God, you're connected to everything that God contains. For me, we are the best image of this space is this empty space. Saint Francis called it poverty. He was literally poor, but he was more, a spiritual sense of poverty is that we have room for God, to hear God. And that place of poverty is life-giving. And so to me, the image that I was given by my spiritual mentors, Bruce and Ruth Davis, I've done retreats in Assisi, Italy with them. Many, I've taken 2 groups from here, 1 from every church I've been in. And it's a place of spiritual home for me. We've also went to Bali with them and did a spiritual retreat based in Hinduism. And I went to Switzerland once, based on a Christian saint. But they taught me a lot about this. And the image Bruce gave me personally, and I've heard him use it since, is that this space we go to in meditation is like a vast ocean that has no bottom and no end. We live on the surface of that water. And the surface is calm much of the time and beautiful. But there are times it gets very choppy. Sometimes it gets chaotic and out of control. And Bruce says, but you only have to go down in the water into that place of fullness where God dwells. And he talks about meditation going deeper, deeper, and deeper into that ocean. And how do we get there? We get there through learning to be quiet and learning to quiet our minds. Now, this is not an easy thing. I remember the first time I went to retreat in Assisi, Italy. We'd gone to Assisi, Marlon, on another trip, and we had met Bruce and Ruth, and we found them very powerful, loving people. I didn't know what kind of people these were, so I didn't want to commit to a week. So I found out about him, and we didn't know whether we were going to have a kid or not. And he said every couple has to have a kid, whether it's a real kid or something they share in common. That was such freeing advice for us. Then we got cured. So, but he did a very good job of teaching us, but didn't teach us everything about it. He assumed that you had some knowledge of meditation, and I didn't quite know what I was doing. And he didn't start with 5 or 10 minutes like I would recommend. He started with sometimes almost a full hour. We'd sit in a circle and on prayer cushions, or if you didn't feel comfortable, in a chair. And it was a beautiful center, an altar that he'd made with cloth and candles and icons sometimes, and flowers that we would bring. And he would start in his deep voice and describe the place of meditation. Tell us to take some deep breaths and let our breaths go. And to let our thoughts go. Well, how do you let your thoughts go? My mind is just moving. Well, there's a lot of ways that Christians and people in other faiths do it. One is to pay attention to the breath. This is my favorite, and I'm going to teach you this in a second. Paying attention to the inward and the outward breath, and just letting the thought go. You probably more are going to come. Don't judge yourself. You're never going to reach perfection with this. That's part of meditation. Acknowledge it, let it go. Listen to the breath. Come back to the breath. And continue to let it go. You know, it was really hard for me, especially after like 50 minutes. Really hard. But the more I've done it, at this point in my life, I have great pauses of just really feeling my mind's empty. That just is maybe discussed for old age. I don't know how I'm getting older. But, you know, I do think it's because I just value that time, that moment. I find it so restoring. It's powerful on a physiological level. It's been measured. You can lower your blood pressure, your blood sugar. If you continue to do it along with good exercise and good health, people who have had bad diagnostics of things have found themselves extending their life or getting very, or even well. But we do it for spiritual reasons. We do it because we want to connect with, have a taste of the kingdom of God in this place, to experience that. And the more that we can move into this peaceful place where we don't feel judged, the more it resources our life to be a contemplative person in our daily lives. And so going deep is much of what it's about. So I want to first ask you if you have any questions, and I want to do a practice. Where are we on time? We got some time. So I've said a lot. What are you hearing? What questions or what things that you struggle with what I've said?
I think that what you have said, at least in my mind, tries to make me think of what in my life I have tried to do that. And if there's anything in the way I live that can coordinate. In other words, maybe I've already learned some things that will help me connect with what you're saying.
Right. Anything specific comes to mind? What was you?
Well, because I've been single, maritally speaking, all my life, there have been many times that I have been alone. And I think anyone who essentially has lived a whole life alone starts to recognize, hearing people such as you're doing now, who look in positive ways about the advantages of being alone.
Mm-hmm.
I think back over times when I have actually enjoyed being alone. But I was faced with a number of deaths early on, beginning with the fact that my mother's best friend and she were in the hospital having two little girls at the same time. And we, me, Lois, and her, pre-named Phyllis, were going to be best friends. I lived, Phyllis died at birth. And that became the beginning, as it were, as I look back many decades later in my life. My 6 best friends were all dead before I was 40.
Wow.
Killed, cancer, heart, you name it, plane crash. And I started to feel like Typhoid Mary. You get acquainted with me, you die. And I had to cope with that in my 40s. And things have gotten better, but I have no old friends. They're gone. And my life in my scattered careers, music was my third, but being supported by people coming out of the woodwork, as it were, sometimes, things have only gotten better. But I had to hang in there. And giving me time and through, in many cases, this church, I have found more and more psychological companionship over the years, but you have to look for it.
Right.
I mean, I had all kinds of stumbling blocks, reminding me of how alone I was.
Right.
And since in my family, my mother was not a contemplative sort, and the relatives are like, was what I got from the old Swedish.
But you've learned.
Nice girls don't leave home until they're married.
You've learned silence is the power of that.
Absolutely.
John, you had something to say.
My own company was okay.
When you talk about heart, you went like this. And I just want to clarify, I don't think you mean the physical heart.
No. I mean, a spirit is a symbol for,
Yeah.
and some, in Judaism, it might be stomach, frankly, because that's where we feel compassion and love. It might be seen differently in different places. Jan?
A small anecdote. It was about Thanksgiving time. I ran into Frank Ginn, Madge's husband, in the Brand Foods. and he was having trouble finding the spice he wanted. He had just returned from an area visiting his mother, who was in the process of dying at that point. And what Frank was looking for in the grocery store was time, because he felt he needed that to put into his scrambled eggs for his mother. And we both stood there realizing that what he was really trying to do was give his mother some more time.
Thank you.
Yes, Nancy.
I had 10 years, I wasted 10 years of my life over, well, where are my kids and how come I'm divorced, and 10 years.
Right.
And I could not get out of it. The depression, etc. And so one day or night, middle of the night, I looked up at the sky and I started to realize that this astronomy, the study of astronomy and that moon and how little I am and my breath, I started connecting my breath with all the things I didn't know about the universe. And I realized something about the relationship, and I started me thinking differently. And I think I started, the next day on a different path.
Wow, that's a transition moment.
Yeah.
The moment of grace is what, we may call it practicing the presence of Christ, but you may not even think about it, but it's happening.
Getting back to the topic at hand, contemplation. I think if we looked it up in the dictionary, it would say thinking about something. So what are we relating all this to? Because, our minds are constantly thinking. I don't know if AI is ever going to be able to determine what everybody's thinking about that you're looking at. So we're always thinking about, what the to-do list, but when you're talking more about contemplating, what do you contemplate?
Well, to contemplate, there's lots of ways to do it. Lots of ways to go into contemplation. One is to pay attention to your breath. The other is to have a word that you go back to. And that word sinks in. It could be peace. Thich Nhat Hanh, in a book called No Mud, No Locust, his last book, really gives an illustration of a lot of those really in the back of a very practical thing you can use. Is letting the words sink in can be part of the practice. A bell is a universal symbol of pay attention to to God. Center yourself. I've gone, one of the retreats I did, the guy would ring a bell just every few minutes, and when we were meditating, we'd always come back. The bell would be a symbol for that. A mandala. I had one in the stained glass of the church I grew up in. I doubt many people knew what it was. I didn't until I read about it in theology school. Beautiful design with a center. You pay attention to the center, and it brings you back to a place. And it's true, sometimes when you're meditating, you may find yourself emptying your mind, and all of a sudden something from somewhere will come to you, and it will be an insight that you let yourself listen to. It's not like it's clearing all that stuff that prevents us from going deep, so that something from beyond us and within our unconscious maybe comes to us.
May I respond, Eleanor?
Yeah.
Eleanor, I think a lot about your question sometimes as a person who meditates. And I think about Eckhart Tolle, who wrote The Power of Now. And in that book, he makes a simple statement: we are not our thoughts. You are not your thoughts. And I find this teaching occurring in Christian contemplation, Buddhist, Hindu, and so on, or non-religious contemplation. So contemplation in this sense is not contemplation in the usual sense of that word, which is to think. It's more about being aware of thoughts and being aware of emotions. So I found working with children who are anxious, fearful, whatever, to say, you have emotions. We all have emotions, but don't let your emotions have you. Likewise, we all have thoughts, but let's not let our thoughts define us, right? Let's put a little distance called contemplation between our feelings and our thoughts, or even our physical pain. If we have physical pain, Eckhart Tolle talks about that too. Contemplation allows us to step back, take a broader view, and say, I'm not this thought. I really want to harm my neighbor. I am not that thought. That thought comes, and another thought will come later. And I remember, many of you will remember Mel Schwartz, who for some time was one of the co-leaders of this ministry. Mel said that he learned from a contemplation teacher to think of meditation as like sitting by the bank of a stream. I learned this from Mel. Sitting by the side of the stream, and then you are observing the thoughts flow by. You're not judging them,
Right.
you're just observing them. So contemplation in this sense, no matter whether it's religious or non-religious, Christian, other, it gives us more ability to not let our thoughts, our feelings, even our physical pain define us and rule the roost of our lives so that we can have some control over our minds, but also our emotions and all those crazy things people do every day in our lives. We really have no control over any of that. So I hope that's a helpful.
That's in those terms, then, I think I've been contemplating most of the day all my life.
Yes.
But but keep in mind too, when you go into this place, it's not about succeeding. If you're in the mindset of judging yourself, am I doing this? Oh, I'm doing it. Or it's not about succeeding, it's about being present to something. It's what we've been talking about Buddhism last week, we'll talk next week. It's life, everything passes, comes and goes. You hold on to nothing. So our thoughts are the same way. And I like the way Jeffrey said it, because it's not that, it's just that we don't own our thoughts. We learn to have them and let what next comes and be present.
Can I just jump in real quickly? If any of you ever went to Sunday school and wondered why we don't have burning bush moments now, the Bible is full of them, and yet we don't necessarily know anybody who's had one. You'll find them in the silence. When you listen to the silence rather than to the noise, they are there.
It's very powerful, isn't it? It's a space where we feel connected and not alone. That's what's puzzling about it. I want to have time for the extra thought.
Yeah, we are getting close, and
I want to just do that. We'll have to come back and do leftover demos sometime. But the way I learned meditation was simply this: it's focusing on our breath. I find that the easiest way to meditate. You can do it with music or words, but I find that always available to us. And the simplest way is always to pay attention to the breath. And I want you to notice right now, I want you to take a big, deep, just take a regular breath. And let the breath out. The exhale should be slightly longer than the inhale. So take a few breaths first by yourself, and then I'll give you some more instructions. Take a couple of good breaths. Close your eyes if it's helpful. I want you to notice as you continue to take a breath and let go. Notice your nostrils, the inside of your nostrils. Feel the breath come in. Feel the breath come out. Notice that it's cooler when it comes in. It's warmer when it comes out. When you breathe in, breathe not to your chest. that will cause anxiety. Breathe deeply into your stomach. When you breathe out, make the exhale longer. Continue to notice your breath. Notice the thoughts that go through your mind. Acknowledge them or bless them. Let them go. Continue to do this. And if you get distracted, just pay attention to that breath coming in to your nose, your nostril. And listen to the exhale. Think about a few minutes, I'll tell you when. One week or longer than you. Some of you did. Some of you may have found got a little anxious, but imagine doing that for 5-10 minutes a day.
What if put you to sleep?
That's how I
Yeah.
I do that.
Because then you're really, then you have to really concentrate on breathing, but if maybe it relaxes you, sometimes you feel like sleeping.
Don't judge yourself. Let's get nature time. Nature time. Yeah, and sometime I'll happen.
I just want to say this,
Yeah.
this whole topic has made me see things differently. The African Christianity comes across as more aggressive towards other religions.
Right.
And you hear people preach about God being bigger than any other religion, that kind of thing. And I'm thinking, if you are that big, you don't have to make somebody smaller. Just see how huge he is. And I'm looking at the skyscrapers we have in Chicago here. You don't have to knock down the smaller houses for them to stand tall. So it's like my Christians, who we call ourselves, if we do that, then we are belittling our God. We are fighting his battles, you know. and we shouldn't-
That's so beautifully said.
That's what I'm thinking.
I'm gonna have to go. And I just invite you to play with this. Remember, it's no judgment. It's a place of not proving itself. It's a place of dwelling with God as always, a foretaste of heaven. It's a way of finding freedom to be in your active life, outward life, more fully present. So thank you for coming to this big crowd today.
Thank you.